Hello, everyone. This is Tricia Ramsey, and on behalf of Foursquare and 451 Research, a part of S&P Global Market Intelligence, I would like to welcome you and say thank you for attending today's webcast titled Transforming Commercial Real Estate with Location Intelligence. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. To ask a question, simply type it in the question box on your screen. We will get to as many as we can during the Q&A session. The presentation slides are available for download in the resources section in the console. And finally, the on-demand version of this webinar will be available once the live event concludes. Leading off today's discussion, we have Cheryl Kingstone, who is Research Director of Customer Experience and Commerce at 451 Research. Joining Cheryl, we have Ariel Eck, who is Director of Marketing at Foursquare. We welcome our speakers today, and with that, I'll turn it over to Cheryl.
Absolutely, and thank you very much for joining today's session. We will actually jump onto the agenda slide. So the topic today is very interesting, and it's finally a topic that as we go out and about and we start understanding and head back into normal, what is going on with location intelligence? We are out there today. The market has shifted. So what we're going to go over today is some research that we did to interview users of location intelligence, how they were responding to it, what the real estate businesses are doing. We're also going to take a look at more persona work. So with respect to the data, what is it telling us? What are digitally driven organizations doing that may be digitally delayed and can really learn from? And when we get that, we're also going to be able to turn that into some best practices and opportunities to learn, especially if you haven't really engaged with location data and you're just trying to understand what are the use cases, what does it mean for my organization? And then on top of it, how can we understand how to do it right? So how are we going to overcome some of these key challenges? And what is the art of the possible? And so that's absolutely critical because we are changing. We're coming out of this pandemic and we are out and about, and location data is now even more relevant than it was before the pandemic. It became relevant even during the pandemic, and now it's even growing. And so what the data does show is that location intelligence is absolutely strategic. But when we look at that, what is it? What do we mean? What is the use of location? So it really has to do with geospatial data, how are we using the different mapping technologies, and then combining that with your internal data and other assets to improve a lot of your business processes. And some other topics that I brought out with some of the research that I've been doing is all about being data-driven. So we're going to go about that because a lot of businesses are really trying to double down in a variety of areas. One, their first-party data to understand what's going on with their customers, but also really quality third-party data. A lot of that has really been depreciated. There's not a lot of good options out there today. And so what this is doing is it's really showing you how you can really use very good quality data in real time based on location that's going to improve your business processes and decision making. Because 92% of our executives or our respondents that we're talking about here plan to increase their spending on location intelligence in the last 2 years. And the reason for that is really all about that shift to digital, that dramatic change in behaviors that happened in COVID really did reshape a lot of the business practices that we're starting to see in cross industries. And commercial real estate isn't just one industry. We have under retail and quick serve restaurants, a lot of different verticals actually have commercial real estate within there. And so that's really where you want to take a look at things like how is consumer behavior changing and how are we going to understand, especially as we look at the physical environment to the digital environment. And so when we bring together the overarching changes and the value of location intelligence, it really is all about how businesses are using it to be completely vital and to succeed and remain competitive in the future. And so this is an actual quote. And this is what I really want to point out. Through this presentation, you're going to see executive quotes on how the value that location intelligence is bringing to these organizations. So it's not just about survey data, it is about more qualitative insight on what it's bringing to organizations. And so as leading technology players is really coming, this is where Foursquare really has bringing some information. So Ariel, how is this becoming really vital for businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. As the leading location technology platform, Foursquare knows that location intelligence is really vital for businesses, particularly in real estate. We're in the business of deeply understanding movement in places and using our technology to understand where things are and how people are moving throughout the world. And so our tech stack helps businesses use location to make more informed decisions to ultimately drive business success. So we're working with leading commercial real estate firms as well as commercial real estate teams at brands with brick and mortar presence to drive a competitive edge. And so we're really, really excited to see this research because it validates what we're hearing in the market in real estate, that location is incredibly important to drive differentiation today, and it will only become more important in the years to come. So excited to hear more about the research and to share more of what we're hearing on our end as well.
Yeah, and to double down on that, I mean, just to give you some stats from the data, that was a quote, but what's really interesting is you're seeing that 73% are investing in new technology to keep up with this market change. So it really is about that digital shift and where we're seeing pressures. But it's specifically about location data. Again, the industry as a whole is really trying to become much more data-driven, and that is becoming strategic so that you can use it, especially over the next 2 to 3 years as we mature with a lot of our data platforms. We're seeing the ability to bring in a lot of this data. So against this backdrop, we're really starting to see how businesses are currently investing in new technologies to take advantage of a lot of these market shifts. It's giving a more value add to geospatial data in conjunction with other company data. So that's that first party data, that's other location data sets, that's demographic data, and all of this really needs to be brought together. And we're going to go through that later in the deck. And so when we do look at this, it really comes down to what I would say is the future of where businesses are trying to go to be data driven, or really around overall digital transformation. So we've seen digital transformation initiatives really escalate over the last 5 years. And so that's part of what we're going to take a look at when we talk about digitally driven organizations, the fact that they have formal strategies for digital transformation. And also, we also like to take a look at where businesses are with their data-driven strategies and how they are potentially early adopters of technology too. So all of this is what plays together to be more of this persona per se. And that's what's driving a lot of this change. And so when we do take a look at the use of this, it really is about relying heavily on the location data to improve and grow profits. Why is that? I mean, you can't just take location data and then understand how it's going to impact. So it's not just about the location data itself. It's the value and the depth and the timeliness of that data. Because to meet a lot of that modern needs in this digital economy, businesses are really looking to transform into these digital businesses. And to a degree, they're growing and making critical decisions based on digital transformation goals moving forward. And so the findings of this study does dive down into the changes within the commercial real estate team and the rising number of these teams that are embedding it across different stakeholders within the businesses. And it becomes really, as we can say, informed decisions for the future. And it does come from a C-suite above all the way down to actually day-to-day operations. And so when you look at this, the question really comes down to what are we doing to understand who is leveraging this today, what are the different use cases, and how are they really transforming their business? And that's why we want to take a look at what digitally driven firms within the real estate, but again, these same use cases can be within groups, within retail, and other very location-specific insight that's really meeting more of that consumer behavior, understanding the shift of where people are and how they can make decisions and use this data across multiple different use cases. So real estate firms do find themselves looking at it from more of this digitally driven point of view. And so that's where the best practices that are given on the outlook. So many organizations that are digitally driven are the cutting edge, right? They're really taking a look at things around understanding cultural shift. And so when we look at digitally driven, this is where you can see that 91% of digitally driven organizations have formal data-driven strategies, and they're really using location intelligence as a highly strategic focus for the business. And why that is so important is because if you look at the other side, and if you look at only the fact that 33% of digitally delayed, now those are organizations that don't have formal strategies, aren't really using data-driven analysis, aren't really early adopters of technology. Once they have that formal strategy in place or don't have, they're not really looking and they're going to fall behind, right? So they don't have the right information. They are very tactical in nature, and they aren't really using location intelligence as highly strategic. There's a 30-point gap. But even if you look behind that 30-point gap, still 51% of even digitally delayed organizations still state that it's highly strategic, right? So if you really want to take a look at how that is prevailing for the future, that's where we do need to understand how important the real estate professionals are finding themselves to be more data-driven. It's radically shifting the market, and a large upswing among the economic recovery is really changing the need for more real-time data. That's what we're going to find out as we go back into the office. The pandemic changes that have happened, the shift from e-commerce back to in-store has really changed the momentum that we're really looking at to be more positive. And things like in-person hospitality or retail or office environments, while they might be changing with recessionary pressures and inflationary pressures, the reality is we're out and about. And so what can we learn from these best practices that these digitally driven organizations are using, and how is that translating to improved effort by this cohort and market leaders in the commercial real estate perspective as it relates to location intelligence? And so when we take a little bit further, we want to then drive down is it doesn't matter if this is what they're looking at, and it doesn't matter that digitally driven organizations are doing this within the next 2 to 3 years or even now. What's most important is the value that these organizations are finding today, right? And we saw that in the quotes that you're going to see throughout this presentation. But here, it's most important. So if you're on the fence of how it's going to be used within your organization, 72% are stating that organizations' current use of location intelligence has a high value for that cost. So what do they mean? What are the use cases? We'll go over that. 89% are anticipating a huge increase in overall spend over the next 2 years, especially as it relates to using location data. So that's another great data point to take away on how the value for them. And 76% is looking at how they're going to use it within their client base. So what are they doing to make sure that their partners and their other clients are actually using it to achieve goals? And so while we're talking about a recovery here across the U.S. and shifting regulatory changes around where we were going with location data, you really need to understand that as we're out and about, this data is becoming even more valuable. So retail stores or restaurants really have to understand where to place that shopping center, that new store location. How do we make it more tangible? How are we going to place office space, since everyone is, not necessarily going to stay working from home? And as we look at location intelligence, where is the ROI and the overall growth? And that's where those use cases come into play. And so when we did ping the organizations and where they were really spending on a lot of those use cases, this is where I'd like to spend a little bit more time, This is where also Ariel is going to dive down into specific use cases and where we're coming as the relationship of using location data for your competitive advantage. But in the light of all this upheaval, you can see that these are really starting to leverage more timely data, more insight to really create these actionable insights. And so things like the ability to optimize the layout for the commercial real estate, the placement of the store within the shopping mall. And then we're going to go down even further on things like sales and marketing support, trade area analysis, but even ones at the bottom of the stack. Where are we going with the tenant site selection? How are you using this to optimize pricing within your organization and understand how this can really improve a lot of where we're going? So it becomes critical insight that's really necessary to navigate this market flux. So it's about having the oversight and the speed to adapt. And with that deeper insight into specific use cases, that's where we start seeing things like optimizing the layout for the commercial real estate and placement of the stores. That's where we're seeing that digitally driven organizations are really pioneering this. And so they can really understand and be that guided advisor for tenant selection and where we want to make sure that we're helping find the best fit for the right organization, for the lease and the buyer and the purchaser. And this is where if we bring it all together and understand these use cases and how it can support the broader organization. And so when we look at a lot of these specific use cases that are going to be unearthing these opportunities, this is where I'm going to pass it to my colleague to go specifically into a handful of ones that are really showing great use cases to create location data for a competitive advantage.
Thanks, Cheryl. Yeah, I'd love to talk more about a few of the specific use cases. In particular, thinking about site selection. We're working with leading commercial real estate firms at retail brands and to commercial real estate firms to find the best locations for them to set up shop. So digitally driven firms are leading the way when it comes to site selection. For example, one analysis that we see them using is looking at the transition. So where do people go before and after a location? What percentage of them are coming directly from an office? How does that influence traffic? Location can be used to calculate metrics such as the average distance traveled or the audience overlap with other locations. In our Unfolded platform, we see real estate teams conducting similarity analyses and suitability analyses where they build dynamic visualizations of that data. Our data helps these commercial real estate teams prove or disprove hypotheses. So they can find out, are the anchors truly drawing the most traffic to a shopping center? Or is it a gym or a coffee shop that's really the first stop and why people are visiting that location? This ultimately can drive smarter decisions. So what is the impact of opening a grocery store in a shopping center or a co-working space or a gym? What does the consumer journey look like as a result of that site selection? Do people shop at other stores before and after, or are they only going to that one store in the shopping center? Ultimately, our data can really prove and disprove those hypotheses in order to inform much smarter decisions and ultimately help them select the best site for them to set up a new shop. Another great use case that we're seeing is in crafting marketing and sales materials and assets for the commercial real estate teams. So it's not just the strategy team or the data team that's using location intelligence, but it's actually the sales and marketing teams. For example, a mall could use location to create data-driven collateral, and we can help them showcase and really prove things like, is the dwell time in your mall higher than the dwell time in other malls in your area? Or does the average shopper visit more stores within your mall than in other malls? Are people willing to travel further to reach your mall than to reach other malls? And so by giving them real data behind these claims and powerful visualizations of that data can be extremely valuable for sales and marketing teams to make their case for their locations. The last use case that I wanted to speak to is around trade area analysis. So not only are commercial real estate teams looking to understand the area of the trade area analysis when they're looking to make a decision about the site that they're selecting, but also, on an ongoing basis in order to make more informed decisions. So one great example is a project that we did with an office supply retailer, and they reached out to us because their stores in a particular region were seeing lagging sales, and they really couldn't figure out why. And so they had a lot of theories, but they couldn't really prove any of them. And so with location intelligence, we were able to uncover a few key reasons why their sales were lagging based on the placement of the locations. A few of their locations had been co-located with a leading toy store brand that had shut down locations, and people had been young parents going to the toy store before and after the office supply store. And so when the toy stores closed, then their locations took a hit as well. We also found that it actually wasn't the competitive office supply store that was stealing traffic from them, but it was actually a big box store brand that had opened, a Target had opened a bunch of locations nearby this office supply store, and that was actually where people were going instead. And so understanding the demographics of your visitors, are they young parents, understanding the catchment area, and competitive trends can really give you a full picture of your trade area in a way that you can only really get with location data. So those are some of the use cases that we are really excited about, but all of the different ones that Cheryl talked through are really important ways in which real estate teams are driving a competitive edge. I'll pass it back to her to talk through that in a little bit more detail.
Absolutely. And so when we do take a look at all these different use cases, it really can take a look at how you're going to take this data and how it can really empower the rest of the organization. Because when we do take a look again at these use cases, it's really important to understand the broad use of data, from sales intelligence to identifying development opportunities within market trends, to understanding derivative information around customer intelligence, and even understanding how you're going to place a certain property and how you're going to collaborate with your constituents. And so when we really do look at these different best practices and opportunities, we want to make sure that we're looking at it across the entire organization. Because as businesses are really becoming data-driven, there's a lot of opportunity to understand who should I bring to the table to make these decisions at the right effectiveness for my organization. A lot of it has to do with, yes, of course, your chief data officers and where they're trying to go, but there's also operational, there's IT. You'll see here strategy has to come into play. But where I'd love to see it is also product placement and finance. But as we look further, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hit that. So as we look further, the strategic nature and the transformation of the location data is really useful across multiple different constituents. And from a top-line perspective, when we look at digitally driven, it's even higher. So digitally driven organizations will see 62% of respondents are in the IT, compared to really more of the digitally delayed, which is much further behind. More of the data side of it. IT is always pretty influential, but other stakeholders that we'd really like to understand and we'll see growing over the next 2 to 3 years is, where is the strategy going? How is finance getting involved with a lot of this? How are the product teams getting involved? And so as real estate firms are starting to use a lot of these location intelligence for things like sales and marketing, as retail is starting to look at it from product placement, or location for the store, we're seeing the opportunity to support other key business functions. And so we really do want to make sure that the entire business is coming together to use this data very strategically. And so when we look at the top issues, it's really important to have it not just be me saying this, is when we look at the C-suite executives, they're saying that location intelligence is enabling the organization to achieve its business goals, right? It's extremely valuable. And why is it valuable is because of those use cases, because the data can be used. And the way that we're looking at it is the ability to blend both that physical data with the digital insight that we're trying to understand. Ariel brought through a lot of those great use cases in just a few of those areas. But when we include a lot of the demographics in other areas, what do they buy? Where do they go? What is the fact that we're understanding? Is it mountainous? Is it coastal? Is it desert? That's where we can start really using location data to understand the area and the geographic business, because it is extremely valuable. And so digitally driven organizations are saying that the value of the location data is really improving data access. It's about the flexibility of the data and how they're able to integrate that with new sources of data to provide this insight and blend the information. But they need to be able to use it in a very visually compelling way. So we wanted to take a look at, what's stopping. We talk about this great opportunity, but some of the areas that we need to understand, and what we're focusing on, is that organizations aren't really keeping up with the pace of change. And so they're using really old data. And that's why businesses are very frustrated with some of their data-driven decisions today, because they're concerned about things like data quality. They're concerned about restrictions of data. They want to make sure that they can keep up with integrating a lot of the different data sources. And so when we do take a look at a lot of these needs across the organization and how we're going to understand really the art of the possible and where it's trying to come out, it's very clear that real estate professionals are all about using that location data across the industry and combining it with things like market data and demographic data, environmental data. Of course, yes, the points of interest data and the GIS data, but you want to make sure that it's always up to date, and that a lot of that data has limitations of where you're trying to go. So you want to make sure that you're providing flexibility to really unlock the wealth of insight from those existing data stores, because it really isn't just about one and done. It's about understanding how you can blend a lot of this data together so that you can be data driven. And that means bringing that location intelligence and blending it and harnessing it with your existing technologies. So as real estate companies really look to adapt a lot of your digital first market landscape and the data requirements that are really changing, it's about understanding real-time data. It's about having the timeliness of that data. It's about the ability to make sure that you're not relying on outdated data or static data to make business decisions, but look to make sure that you're improving the data quality, that you're integrating it across the different sources, and that you're using it so that you're able to really improve where we're going for the future. Because it really isn't about just using data for data's sake. It's about the timeliness and the flexibility to identify crucial emerging opportunities. Right, Ariel?
Yeah, absolutely. We know that timeliness is critical for real estate teams to adapt and act really quickly, and this can be a pain point for our customers. It's become incredibly difficult since COVID because they're facing an altered map of the world with thousands of businesses opening and closing and rapidly changing consumer behaviors. And so they really need to keep their finger on the pulse of what is going on and have access to fresh data up to the day. We're uniquely positioned to provide unparalleled data freshness because of our first-party data. So having real humans on the ground verifying data, telling us which stores have opened or closed is really critical. And so by combining that human element with AI and ML models, that's what allows us to deliver freshness that the commercial real estate teams need. The other really critical piece here is integrating and blending multiple data sources, as Cheryl alluded to. So we see that commercial real estate teams want to combine our point of interest data as well as geographic data and foot traffic data with things like census data or environmental data. And so using a tiling system called hex tiles within our Unfolded platform, along with spatial joins, users can easily identify, unify, and enrich large-scale data within the browser in a matter of minutes. And so prior to hex tiles, joining these geospatial data sets from different sources was really difficult. And now with this solution, users can easily join these data sets of varying formats and precisions together to derive meaningful insights within a matter of minutes. We're also seeing commercial real estate teams combining our data with other data in platforms like Snowflake, where they can have one single source of truth. A major pain point that we hear about from our customers is in data access. And so fortunately, Foursquare is solely focused on geospatial. And so with our flexible terms, we're able to help give access to that data and flexibility in how they're using it. The other thing that commercial real estate teams are looking for with the location provider is easy to use visualizations. And so with Unfolded, Foursquare's advanced geospatial visualization and analytics tool that we acquired in 2021, that really allows anyone to analyze spatial data and create and share visualizations of different spatial data sets. And so that's something that we're really excited to be able to bring to the table for commercial real estate teams. I'll pass it back to Cheryl to talk more about that.
And so everyone always comes and asks, so great, I understood the fact that we have use cases. I understand the value of where it's trying to go. But what's push comes to shove, a lot of businesses are like, how do I really understand how that's this going to improve performance, profitability, and growth? And so ultimately, location intelligence really is a key technology to do that. So here are some metrics that a lot of companies are either using today or in the future. So when we look at things like internal rate of return, or how to understand how to measure and change of rate per square foot, or the fact that they're trying to understand how to do ROI by location property, or understanding things like tenant roster, right, and or vacancy rates. It really is about bringing all this data together so that you can understand the positive impacts of your business. And so, yes, everyone is focused on their own first-party data. Everyone is focusing on technology to create data lakes using things like Snowflake, like Ariel said. But if you don't have the right data going into that, you're really missing an opportunity to really predict the market growth moving forward, because we really do need to distill it into these impactful and timely insights so that we can understand the future of where we're going and not just look at the rearview mirror, which is a lot of the static data that we're relying on today. There's a lot of time, if you're just relying on historical information, you're not going to see quickly enough the decisions that you're going to need to make about using these overall capabilities that's really influencing these digitally driven organizations at scale. Because we need to make sure that we're putting together, as we had said earlier, about the future direction of using a lot of these investments that have helped them really focus on their clients and their customers and their valuable insights to grow performance, profitability, and growth. And so when we look at these metrics, it really does really focus on the financial performance of these property investments, but it shows the potential for future scale. And that's why I want to start seeing it's not just about IT here, and it's not just about data strategy. It's about bringing organizations together from financial and from the strategy team to make sure that we're using the right information at the right time, whether that be business data, whether that be consumer data, whether that be third-party location data, as we can see here. And so when we do take a look at it, the best part, and this is really one of the last quotes that I'm going to go over as it relates to just pulling it all together. And this was the best one that we got from one of our respondents here, then we're really trying to understand the value of location data to their organization. And they said it means everything for their company. So it's very important to keep the doors open for business. And that's because they're able to get the right information blended with the right data that they have internally within the organization. They can do it in a scalable fashion with the flexibility and timeliness to get at the right information. And so that's how you can really learn from these digitally driven organizations so that you can make the right decision at the right time. And I do want to make sure that we leave enough time for Q&A at this point. So I'm going to pass it off to Tricia to make sure that we are getting at your questions with enough time. And I'm going to just move over, because if there's other questions that you want to get at, here's our contact information. But feel free to reach out to Ariel or myself or some of the questions, or put it into the Q&A below on what do you need from your location data and how are you planning on using it in the future. Would love to see any of your questions below. So Tricia, how are we with some of the questions we have?
Thank you, Cheryl. And just
Yep.
Thank you. And just the reminder, it's not too late to submit your questions. We do have a couple now, so let's get started. Our first question, what are you hearing from your real estate customers in terms of return to office in the future of work? What role does that play in real estate investment decisions?
Yeah, I think I could take that one. We're definitely doing a lot of research around how consumers are behaving around the return to the office and keeping a close eye on that. And our perspective on that is that offices aren't going away anytime soon, but the ways in which they're being used is changing. And so our data showed last year, actually, that even individuals who are fully remote, who haven't gone to the office, about 90% were visiting a bar at least once. And so they're not necessarily avoiding the office because they don't want to be around people, but more perhaps from convenience and personal preference. And so in order to incentivize employees to return to the office, we're seeing companies investing in quality spaces with amenities and perks and offering flexible opportunities for in-person collaboration. And Foursquare ourselves have taken that approach as well. But this is really important for real estate firms to adapt to this new reality because they need to optimize their commercial spaces and appeal to employees to make it a desirable destination to go to work. And so thoughtful tenant selection means taking into consideration those behavioral nuances by demographic, by market, even by neighborhood. And so that location-specific intelligence can help both employers and real estate firms alike determine where their offices should be located and what benefits and facilities should be provided. So for example, if you have an office space that's co-located with a number of fast casual restaurants, maybe you don't need to invest in offering food services in the space. But if your office is pretty far from any coffee shops that are open during the week, maybe you'd benefit from offering free beverages for your employees. And so we're seeing real estate firms and employers using our data in that way to make decisions that for these sort of new use cases that are popping up around return to office.
Yeah, because we're also, I agree with everything Ariel just said, we're also seeing the whole hybrid workspace and the motivation to get them back in. So not only do you want to understand the timeliness, if it is hybrid, how is that volume changing? But as you said, these organizations are really trying to motivate their back to office. So you can start making sure that you're communicating the value of that space to bring them back in.
Precisely.
All right. Next question. How does this market compare to other markets as it relates to the digital transformation?
So I'll take that one, Ariel, because I have a variety of different surveys. And so one of the angles that we do look at is the maturation of the market. And so I would say a couple of years ago, there were certain industries that were very behind. And the acceleration of digital transformation as a whole has really happened across multiple different industries. So now what we're doing is it really isn't about the digital transformation per se, but it's being much more data-driven. And so we're seeing a lot more investments in things like customer intelligence platforms and investments in data lakes to make sure that all the employees are using the right data at the right time. But most of the problems I'm seeing is they don't necessarily have the data that they need. And so that's where we see the value of location data or third-party data that's actually high quality, because there's a lot of data out there, but if it can't be easily blended and you can't visualize the data and it's not fresh, then they're struggling to see the value. And so what you really need to focus on is not necessarily where businesses are for digital transformation, but where they are in the ability to consume and become data-driven. So I call that a CX data driver and a CX data drifter, because it really is about the data and the timeliness of getting that to your constituents.
All right, the next question. How are commercial real estate teams at retail brands adapting to new shopping behaviors?
Yeah, we work a lot with retailers, so I'm happy to speak to that. Shopping behavior is continuously evolving and changing how commercially driven businesses interact with their customers in the physical environment. And so, e-commerce was rapidly growing prior to the pandemic, and this growth accelerated due to quarantine. But with the darkest days of the pandemic hopefully behind us, we're seeing in our data that people are really eager to shop in physical stores again. And so we're seeing foot traffic to stores back. And we also see that people are planning to continue to shop in stores. So we recently just released a study about back to school shopping this year, and only about 7% of Americans report that they plan to only shop online. So really people are planning to shop both in-store and online, or even only in stores this year. And so we see the momentum is trending in a positive direction as people return to in-store shopping. But physical stores have a new role, right? And so forward-looking retailers are prioritizing this omni-channel approach where they're engaging customers online via mobile and in stores. And so physical stores play a really important role. They can be a distribution center, a pickup location for buy online, pickup in store, and even service showrooms. And so that will only become more sophisticated with new technologies like augmented reality. Brick and mortar can deliver a really unique experience that drives customer loyalty. And so in order to adapt to the changing role of physical stores, we're working with commercial real estate teams at retail brands to optimize the layout of their commercial spaces. So where the store should be within a shopping center, but also, where products are placed within the store. And, really critically, strategically locating their physical locations to optimize for these new use cases, buy online, pick up in store, distribution, and showrooming.
Yeah, I support what Ariel says. My data also supports that, while we did shelter in and we did improve our digital experiences and our requirements for digital, we're still shopping in store, and there was pent up demand. So it was almost like revenge shopping in store and going out to eat in restaurants. And so we're out and about, and we're no longer afraid of that. And that actually isn't changed. So the omni-channel approach started before COVID. It accelerated during COVID, primarily because you wanted to buy online or do the curbside pickup. And now they're back, and we're doing a combination of both. So what are we doing to understand who those consumers are and how we're going to shift? So even what I would say, we did some analysis as it relates to converts versus conservatives versus cutting edge as we started really shifting our behaviors back into store. And even conservatives, the ones that historically weren't really digitally savvy, we now see that 50% of those have now really shifted into more of an omni-channel approach. So we do have to understand these changing dynamics, and it really isn't just about the digital experience, it's about the blended experience.
Absolutely.
All right, I'm moving on to our last question. Feel free to keep the questions coming, or contact us with our contact information here. Let's start with the last question. How do I get all stakeholders to understand the value?
Well, I would say for one, Ariel, don't you think they should use some of those quotes to really get them to understand how they need to get ahead of this curve? And the other thing I would say is, I know I talked a lot about the stakeholders and how it's really important. Show them the data. Show them what digitally driven organizations are doing. Show them the value of the timeliness of the data. Show them how you can visualize the data and in a blended fashion. Ariel, how do you think some of the executives and stakeholders, you can get everyone really involved also?
Yeah, I mean, I think that definitely these testimonials and data is a really strong case for location data. But, with Foursquare in particular, we would love to continue the conversation with you and share, specific case studies with partners that we've worked with to show the results that they've produced. And we're also always engaging in sort of data evaluations where we give you sample data to start to play with, to start to see the impact of that data. And so, again, we'd love to continue the conversation. And I think that the impact can be tremendous across different teams and across all of those different metrics that you saw in the study that we talked about before. So it's not just more informed decisions broadly, but it's really, when you get into the weeds, improving things like internal rate of return.
Absolutely. Those metrics are critical. I think that was it. Any more questions come in, Tricia?
No, that was it for today. That concludes our webinar, our live event. We definitely want to thank Cheryl and Ariel for this informative webcast. And as a reminder, the on-demand version of this live event will be available shortly. So on behalf of Foursquare and 451 Research, S&P Global Market Intelligence, I'd like to thank you for attending and have a great day.
Thank you.
Thank you.